It was only a few days after noticing the opportunity in the newspaper that me and my granddad finally decided to go and experience the CWS in all of former horror. We gathered everything that we would need for the trip and set off in the early hours of the morning. By the time we'd arrived at the harbour, it was nearly midday, so we headed towards the nearby cafe for some lunch. I like to think that we were both hungry enough to merit a meal, but I had the feeling that we were just stalling for time. We took a table with a window view so that we could admire the ship for as long as we wanted before going in. My granddad seemed so distant as he looked up at that rusted metal monolith, his eyes open wide as if trying to pierce the steel. In his fixation, he barely spoke a word for a good 20 minutes or so. After the food we hardly touched went cold, he finally loosened his gaze and faced me. "I'm ready to go in," he said. Heading towards the floating structure, I began to realise how nervous I seemed to be, sweating wildly as huge metal butterflies crippled my stomach. Yet I had no reason to feel this way. I suppose the story had a bigger impact on me than I thought. We trudged through the puddles and black land surrounding the harbour until we finally hit the pier. Looking over at my granddad, he seemed to be a lot more relaxed than I had anticipated. We climbed the stairs up towards the huge metal door on the right side of the ship and approached the ticket barrier. My granddad, being over 60, meant that he only had to pay £2, whereas I had to pay the full admission. Not a bad price for brain-deteriorating nightmares. Then, with a couple of deep breaths and what seemed like infinite hesitation, we finally stepped onto the CWS. Once inside, we slowly made our way to the top of the ship to look around. It only took me a moment to realise how safe and well kept it looked after all these years. So I began to relax as the images of a dark, damp ghost ship subsided in my mind. We started off upstairs and had the intention of making our way down to the all-up deck, but after a second look at the small leaflet that had been handed to us, I noticed that we could only experience half of the ship. The bottom 3 decks had seemingly disappeared off the map, leaving us with only a part of the experience, although I'm sure my granddad didn't mind after all that had happened. After revisiting a few of the old stories he'd told me as a child, we finally decided to leave the quarterdeck and head on down the stairs to the next floor. Up until now, we had only seen 3 other people wandering about the ship with us. We just assumed that they were other people on the lower decks, but once we went downstairs, there were no other people in sight. This deck seemed dirtier, and it didn't have anything to offer. It was mostly empty space and a few metal doors that were sealed shut. Even my granddad didn't have much to say about this deck. "There would usually be a few cargo crates on this deck," he muttered, but that was it. We reached the final deck that we were able to explore and made our way down the narrow corridors ahead. Looking left and right, we could see nothing. Every door seemed to be locked and other corridors were completely blocked off. After speeding through a metal maze for nearly 5 minutes without seeing anything worth mentioning, and already have explored the other 2 empty decks, I couldn't help but feel cheated out of an interesting experience, and my own money. As we neared the end of the deck, we finally reached the huge store that was actually open. But just as I turned around to express my disbelief, I realised that my granddad had not been following me. I stopped in my tracks at the edge of the door and peered down the path I had walked. I shouted for a full minute, but he was nowhere around. I know I should have backtracked to find him, but I had finally found an open door and somewhere that was worth exploring. I assumed that he would find me shortly. After all, with all of the locked doors and blocked corridors, there was only one way forward. I stepped inside and scanned the room. It was a huge area with at least 20 tables in an old, dirty kitchen. It was clear what this place was, but I couldn't help wondering why everything was so neglected on this part of the ship when the quarterdeck was so spotless. maybe this room was meant to be locked too. I made my way into the kitchen and began to look around. Everything was old, damp and rotting. There were still plates on the table and coats on the back of the chairs. It was clear that I wasn't supposed to be in here. As you can expect, I was getting a bad feeling from this place, so I decided to leave. Just as I turned to exit, I noticed a door in the far corner of the room. I didn't want to approach the door, but I felt like I needed to. After all, it was probably locked anyway. Dodging tables and various stains on the floor, I slowly made my way over to the corner of the room. I placed my hand on the cold steel of the huge metal handle and mustered enough strength to pull it down. Then it opened. A huge wall of damp air hit me as I recoiled and coughed into my hands. I examined the darkness to try and make out where I was, but I couldn't hear or see a thing. At this point, I wasn't sure what to expect. The door was unlocked, so for all I knew, it was part of the tour. I felt my way along the side of the cold wall to try find a light switch. Then, as the lights flickered on, I realised where I was. I was stood at the top of a set of stairs and staring down into a puddle of dim light at the foot of the steps. Now I knew why the other decks were unavailable for viewing. I took the 6 steps down into the yellow light so I could get a closer look around at what was hidden on this deck. The dim light showed a miserable labyrinth of cold metal and dripping walls, a rusted case of neglected memories. Once at the bottom of the stairs, I couldn't help but think of the story the way my granddad described the setting. This all looked very familiar to the images in my mind. I navigated my way further into the dark, the murky lighting now only as strong as a candle. As countless drips echoed throughout the domain, I couldn't help but remember the silence from not 2 minutes ago. I must have wandered further in than I thought, I mumbled to myself. That's when I reached a small staircase leading further into a red glow. I made my way down the stairs and noticed 8 doors, almost in a circle, surrounding me. One of the doors was bigger than all the others and centered at the back of the room. Above it, lit up with a small red bulb, was the word Captain. It was then that I knew where I was. It was almost exactly as I had pictured it, but the fear I felt when imagining it was nothing like when I was there. It was always in the back of my mind that there was a chance my granddad had just created this story for me when I was a child, or maybe even exaggerated a real experience he had. But now I knew that he had told me the truth all along. With my heart growing cold and pounding faster, I turned to head back upstairs, but I froze. That's when I heard the singing. I felt sick to my stomach as the song echoed through the halls, growing louder. It was impossible that this was happening to me. I headed straight back up the stairs. I've never ran so fast in my entire life. Just as I got back up to the top, I heard a huge bang from below, followed by a hideous, deep shriek. I carried on sprinting towards the dim light at the bottom of the staircase that I had so stupidly followed before. My head began pulsating with the worst pain I had ever felt, and I started to grow dizzy. As I ran, I could hear a quiet pounding following me from behind, hitting the puddles and panting heavily. The worst smell hit me as I was almost back upstairs. I knew it was close, and I knew it was real. I reached the top and slammed the door behind me, locking it straight away. As I stumbled into a nearby table, a ferocious thud hit the metal, just the once. I picked myself up straight away and headed back to the corridors. I finally found my way out of the maze and back into the quarterdeck where my grandpa was stood. I was shaking as I tried to get my words out. he took me off the ship and back into the car. I never told him what happened, and at the time, I wasn't sure if he thought I was joking or if I really did experience something. I just wish he was there with me to have kept him from going through that door. I spoke to him yesterday and told him everything. Thankfully, he believed me and had me talk him through every little detail. Going over it so many times has helped me a lot more than I thought it would. I never witnessed what was following me through those halls, so I can't give you details of its appearance. But I know it was definitely the same creature that terrified my granddad all those years ago. After a lot of research and countless phone calls to some of my grandpa's old sailor friends, we finally found out some information. Apparently, the ship is docked at that specific harbour because the captain was born in the nearby town. It was an 8-year run of the ship. He was the first and only captain the CWS had, so out of respect, they placed the ship there. Nobody can explain to us how it went missing for 48 years and then suddenly appeared where it is now. It's been 5 days since I was on that ship, and I'm feeling a lot better than I initially did. It's why me and my granddad are going back to the ship. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we feel like we have to. Within the next couple of hours, we will be heading back to the CWS, but we are going to the nearby town first to talk to the locals and find out some more information.